often see things such as, personalised learning and these all the promises that it can do. That's great, but when I've got my 45-minute lesson, I want to know, what can I do for those 45 minutes?
Rhetoric going around, AI could replace teachers.
When we think about AI, it doesn't inherently care. It's about the fact that it's not cheating. I don't think AI is cheating unless you don't use it properly.
Bianca, welcome to the International Classroom. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
So I'm in the UK, so my school is actually based quite close to London.
There is this rhetoric going around, AI could replace teachers. Do you think there's ever going to be scenarios where it actually might outperform a human educator?
I don't think so. I think there's a space for it in terms of education and in terms of educational settings. I think where you've got, not necessarily in the UK, but globally, where there is a gap in terms of educational provision, I do think there is a space for this technology to build, essentially to bridge a gap once there's a bit more infrastructure. So there is space there for it not to replace a teacher, but to play a role that's almost at a teacher level. However, when it comes to actual teaching in a classroom, I don't think it can, because ultimately, when we think about AI, it doesn't inherently care, quite frankly. It does what we want it to do, but it doesn't care. I go into my classroom, and I'm very privileged in the place that I teach in. They are phenomenal pupils. I work with phenomenal staff who fundamentally care about the pupils that we're teaching. And I imagine almost everyone, or I'd like to think everyone in the profession feels the same. You wouldn't teach if you don't care about the people that you're teaching. AI inherently cannot teach. And I think a lot of the issues in terms of that is, if we look at AI as a provision of content, yes, that's something it's able to do. However, teaching is so much more than that. And I believe that pupils don't just need someone that's able to relay content, they need someone who's able to believe in them. And that's where teachers come in. It's a case of, we are their cheering squad. We're the number one bands. We're also their critiquers as well. But we know them, we guide them, and we care about them. And I think as a learner, you need someone to believe in you to really fulfill your potential.
So what inspired you to focus on AI and led you to then founding AI Edify?
So it started, I suppose, when ChatGPT really became a thing a couple of years ago and more usable. And it was something that I just played around with and occasionally looked at in my practice. Now, whilst I'm a teacher, I'm also last year, I was also an MSci student, which I'm carrying on this year, and I was researching diversity, and I pivoted and did a complete 180 and thought, you know what, I'm spending so long trying to find ways to use AI, why don't I research it and you do it as part of my master's, which means that I can then have access to professionals, researchers, and also other peers and colleagues that are having the same grapples and challenges and also inspiration, I suppose, when it comes to AI. And that led me to a very frustrating place where I couldn't really find very many courses. I couldn't really find very many resources, and all the perceptions that I was kind of exposed to all differed. It was quite an interesting place to be in. And I thought, well, I think it's important that practitioners, especially when we have such limited time as it is to be able to, I suppose, develop our practice. But when it comes to new technology, it's very much a case of, I think we need to support each other. And that's where it came from. So I thought, okay, well, why not create something where we can support one another? We can use something that augments our practice as opposed to just makes it more efficient. And then I spoke to a number of people and no one told me no. So from that, I thought, okay, fantastic. And the more conversations I had, the more people that bought into this idea of, okay, well, what can we do with this? But what can we do within the confines of a school? Because we often see things such as, personalised learning and these all the promises that it can do. That's great. But when I've got my 45-minute lesson, I want to know, what can I do for those 45 minutes? I don't necessarily want something that can revolutionise education in 5 years. I want to know, what can I do for the class that I'm teaching tomorrow and next week, and when they're coming up to their exams and when they're nervous, what tools can I use to help their experience as well as my own?
Yeah, you mentioned something in there that I find a lot in terms of the what. And everyone always talks about the what. Oh, the personalization of this. And there's some people now starting to kick back against that a bit. But a lot of the times they don't focus on the how. And I'm curious from your side, like, what do you think is actually missing from the conversation? And what are the blind spots that are there and we're not really discussing when it comes to AI?
I think one of the major blind spots is the way that we're positioning AI, actually. I think a lot of people are saying, well, what can AI do for education? And I personally don't believe that we should be looking at the educational landscape in regards to it hinging on the newest development in technology. I think maybe this should be a good prompt for us to evaluate our education system, but not because it's a new technology, but more because it's starting to change the way that we could potentially work going forward. And I think it then needs to be reframed. I think we need to look at it as what should education look like in a new digital era, as opposed to what can AI do for our educational settings. I think it's very much a case of repositioning and assessing, is what we're teaching and is the way we're teaching and assessing appropriate for the skills that our pupils are going to go on and need when they become adults and carry on with their working journeys.
Yeah, and that then poses an interesting question that we've got, and whether we are overestimating AI's capabilities, and whether we think the use of it is being realistically used in the classrooms. What's your take on that?
I think in terms of it being realistically used, I think in the short term, I don't think it's going to be used that much. I think there's so many novel things that are coming out, and the pace of change, I think, as much as it's phenomenal to watch, makes it very difficult as a practitioner to be able to actively implement consistently. And I think part of it is being able to explore. But if you know that it's going to change in the next 3 weeks and then the following 6 weeks, it's a difficult thing to build into your practice. And also, with a lot of these promises, I'd love something where it was personalized learning, that I could have something in my classroom that caters to all of my individual pupils' needs. But I don't really understand what that's supposed to look like and how that's possible. I understand that, there's technology where if you had one person with one device, you're able to track their progress and respond in real time. But when I've got a class of however many, I don't really understand how these promises are going to be realised.
But you also mentioned something in that conversation about bridging gaps. And if I flip that on its head, I'm curious then, because could that inadvertently deepen inequalities that we're seeing, especially for schools that lack resources? And if that's the case, how can we go about preventing that? We see a lot of conversation about equality and equity and people talk about that. What would be your strategies to try and prevent those from occurring?
I think it needs to look at infrastructure. I think individual practitioners, it's not something that we are able to do. I think we need to look at infrastructure in terms of how accessible is this. At the moment, because we have some schools, for example, who are completely banning the technology, you have others who are forging ahead with the technology, you have some schools where they've got personalised devices and access devices in terms of pupils, you've got others where they ban phones. It's because there's so many different settings, it is going to create a divide between those who are able to use it and those that aren't, but also in the way they use it. So some schools will have training in place for pupils and for staff so that they use it in line with their objectives. However, there'll be some that don't have that, and so they might be using it in a way that actually means they're using AI as a crutch as opposed to a cognitive aid, for example. Yeah. And I think because of that, it needs to be addressed at a higher level. What I'm seeing at the moment is very much there's a lot of people forging ahead in terms of practitioners of this is what we could do, but actually in terms of legislation and frameworks, we're very behind.
Yeah, because that was going to be my follow-on in terms of what safeguards do you think need to be in place?
I think we need to be very aware of the ethical concerns. That's also part of, in terms of AI Edify, we've built a team where we do have a legal strategist on our team as well. So when we're thinking about going forward and we're thinking about training and tools for staff members and teachers mainly, we're looking at what are the legal aspects here, what are the safeguarding aspects, as well as what is the provision. And I think that's fundamentally important, because as much as I would say go and explore AI as a teacher, we need to be able to understand that there's certain things you should not be putting into an AI model, and also things that you really fundamentally need to question when they come out. So there needs to be that understanding. And when we think about equity and division, that's not just in terms of access. I also think that's in terms of output. When we think about certain applications, the bias that you can see coming out has the capacity to widen these gaps. So I hear a lot, for example, about these podcast AI creators. More often than not, I found anecdotally, and I've spoken to quite a few people and read a couple of reports where they often say that it's the male lead and the female who says, "Oh, isn't that interesting? Or isn't that lovely? Or can you tell me more?" And it's incredibly important that these biases already are addressed early. So even if that's not actually a bias that takes place, the fact that we're questioning it and thinking, is this something that's being relayed back to us? Is this a bias that exists? Or is actually this something that we're feeling as society that we're thinking is being reflected in our AI models? Because there's so many questions, because we don't understand how we're generating the output. We need to think about what are the ramifications of what's coming out of it.
Yeah, and you're right along that in terms of, from an ethical perspective, and even from an energy sustainability perspective. I read something the other day in terms of, and we've known this for a while, people who use it a lot and who are invested in that know how much water it takes, how much energy is being consumed. And yet on the flip side, I find it's almost an oxymoron to some extent about then how AI can be used to help fix the sustainability and the energy problems. And it seems quite interesting that you've got this proverbial, it's terrible, it's consuming so much energy, it's so much water, to then the full circle of, yes, but we can use it to solve this energy issues that we seem to have. And when you speak with people about that and go, did you know that? They're like, no, I didn't. It's like, well, did you know that when it first started, the AI's concept of beauty was what's put onto the internet, and therefore AI's concept, and people have done these tests, haven't they, about what would a doctor look like versus what would a nurse look like? What does a classroom look like? And until you present people with that and the opportunities, like, I never realized. The challenge with that is, how do you embed that into a classroom? And that is kind of, for teachers, for yourself, who is still I was going to say a functioning teacher, but still a practicing educator in the classroom day in, day out, and like myself, who I see 100 kids a day. Is there space? Is there capacity as it stands with the current curriculum and the current exam boards that we sit through? Do you think there's capacity to actually embed AI training and AI literacy into the curriculum?
I don't think that there's necessarily capacity. I think that it should be amended. I think crowbarring this into our current offer, I think, is where it's going to get problematic. Whereas I think if we revision certain elements of it, so let's take exam boards, for example. Ultimately, I'm a history teacher. So if I think about, for example, some of the questions that they might answer at GCSE, less so at A-level because it's far more about evaluation and analysis, but at GCSE, where it's a question such as a key features question, that's very much reliant on memorization of certain facts. Now, if we could then remove those essentially memory testing questions and replace them with problem solving and more analytical, using elements of AI, or having open book exams and not measuring the output but measuring the process. And therefore, if we're looking at how they're citing things, so if you had an open book exam where you could have access to the real world, to textbooks, to AI, to whatever you should so wish, and you're actually evaluated on your problem solving and your resourcefulness, I would think that that'd be a much more valuable measure for our pupils going forward into life than whether they can remember two key features of said historical event.
Yeah, I kind of put it very simply in that respect and go, show me what you can do rather than show me what you know. And that's, it will be moving forward. It's a fascinating conversation because every person we speak with in education, pre-COVID, well, post-COVID now really, talks about exam boards, and yet I've not heard anyone from exam board, anyone from the government side, come out and say this multi-million company, multi-million pound companies, which they are going to change because you're affecting someone's business model. You're affecting economic or income for a government. Why would they change it? It's a fascinating one for maybe, a future conversation and future ideas we get down that. But I want to kind of sidetrack then a little bit because obviously we've had this opening conversation about AI. We know you're a teacher, you're a history teacher, you're still working there. How did it then come about that you've decided then to start, I'm going to call it a side hustle. It's not really a side hustle, but become an edupreneur, these teachers who want to start businesses. And how did you get into this then?
It was very much because I saw that there was a gap in terms of my own training. And I thought, well, ultimately, if there's a gap for me, there's going to be a gap for a great number of other people. And so the conversation carried on, and there were a lot of people that were very interested in this idea. So we thought, okay, and let's get together. And the creation and the curation of the team is what makes us really interesting because we've got educators, but also we've got safeguarding experts. We've got lead researchers. Two of our members, one a silent member and one less so, are both consultants to ministries, which is really interesting because it gives a perspective that I personally didn't have with the UK. And so we're now looking at far more globally, and we also now have so our team are now based in the UK, Middle East, and in India as well, which gives us quite a vast perspective of what's going on. And so it was very much a case of being able to have all of these conversations and people buying into this concept of how do we use it in a way that promotes cognitive stretch? Because, there are companies and there are provisions which talk about, for example, saving time and efficiency, and that's great. I would love to save time. However, I haven't got into teaching to save time. When I'm looking at how to benefit my teaching practice and how to benefit my pupils, I'm not looking at how to save time. That's a wonderful bonus, but I don't believe that should be the fundamental crux of what I'm doing. So we thought, well, how do we position this in a way of it not saving time, but actually being a cognitive aid? So everything we're building, so we've created courses which are currently being piloted, and we've got tools which are in their testing stage as well, and all of them are looking at AI for cognitive stretch and options, not answers. We do not focus on generating answers at all, because my view is I don't want someone else's answer. I want options. I want something that challenges the way that I'm thinking, and something that stretches, and something that thinks, have you not considered this element of something, or this perspective, or this is something you could do differently? That's what I'm interested in, because that's what's going to stretch me as a practitioner. And so that's what we are then developing in terms of our company, our products and our courses, because it's very much a case of if I can save time, that's phenomenal. But if I can be a better teacher and I can stretch my cognitive abilities and base what I'm using on pedagogical practices, that's what I want to be doing. And that's what I think is fundamentally what we should be using AI for.
Because, you've mentioned it there. That's what I was going to ask in terms of what is it basing then, or where is it drawing this research from if we're going for cognitive stretch or options for teachers? If I'm saying, hey, so I'm a scientist and I teach biology. If I said, I'm going to teach my year 11s about the heart, how does it work in terms of what information is the platform going to require from me to be able to then to provide me with 3 options or 5 options of how I can approach the activities within the lesson?
So one of my favourite things to put in is, so one of the tools we're developing is very much plays like a devil's advocate. So you put in your concept on something and it challenges you. It looks at underlying biases you might have. It looks at perspectives you might not have considered. And it just asks you questions and provides insights that you haven't seen. But same with lesson plans. So the lesson plans it generates, they're not answers. The lesson plans are built in with, these are the choices you could have. these are the abilities that you might want to consider, and also these are the areas that might be overlooked. So it's all built in the background. When you're asking for your lesson plan, it's not here's a generic lesson plan which you can just use. It's very much a case of here's a lesson plan which you can then adapt to your own setting. Because the inherent issue I have with some of the tools that we see is it might work for a certain practitioner in a certain school setting, but that does not mean it's going to work for a different practitioner 10 minutes down the road, let alone on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. Ultimately, I believe that when it comes to our practice, it is the teacher in the room that knows their pupils and knows what's going to work for them. And that's why we don't need answers. We need options to be able to stretch and challenge ourselves and address the needs of the pupils that are sitting in front of us.
Most definitely. You probably find yourself then in a very difficult situation from being a practitioner who obviously wants certain things from AI and has that, to now being obviously, I was going to say, a company founder, as a startup, as a leader within that. And as you mentioned, there is a team there. So you have a business to some extent, don't you? So now the ethics that you talk about, I'm curious with how we go about this. How do you ensure that, Edify then is ethically sound? You mentioned obviously a legal component, but the first thing that always comes up to me is like, what do you do with the data?
So in terms of the data, because we have, disclaimers everywhere on our products, which is do not do this, do not enter in personal data, do not enter in pupil data. So that's just as a fundamental ethical perspective and data privacy element of it. And also we don't save the data either. So it's a case of we are using open platforms to essentially funnel everything through. And because of that, we don't handle anything or essentially retain any privileged information. And also, as well as that, we are building a function in which educators and institutions are then able to look and assess at how their own staff members are using it. So not in terms of identifiable information, but more holistically in terms of what elements are being used, and are there elements where people are showing more use of things that may produce bias and things that should be aware of. So basically having an ethical database. Now, when it comes to what we're doing with the company, I am a fundamental believer that I don't want to do anything that I wouldn't do in my own practice. And I think that's what's important. I think there's so many technological companies which are created by people who are not educators and who haven't been in a classroom since they were a pupil themselves. And, it's very much a case of some of these applications I do think are great. I think they're phenomenal. The other day I created a Napoleon that I inflated and deflated out of nowhere. Just it was fun. And but I thought ultimately, as much as that's entertaining for 4 minutes on a Sunday evening, that's not going to help my class ultimately. And there's so many novelty applications that you think, how much of this realistically is going to help teaching and learning? And how much of it is it very much just a novelty application that in about 3 months' time, we're going to think, well, that was great, but it didn't help at all.
Yeah. And the tricky part here is then putting on, it's like, so what's the cost of this, in terms of educators that want to use it or schools that want to use it, because I look at it and I kind of go, I'm someone who uses AI a lot. And I speak to a lot of people out there, and people always go, hey, if anything's free, then especially from an AI perspective, it's because they're selling your data, pretty much. And several startups have said this. And obviously we've spoken about that. So I'd like to think, well, you're not going to sell our data, but you are providing a service of there. Like, what's the cost for educators? What's the cost for schools if they are wanting to use this service?
So it very much depends. When it comes to our opening stage, we are doing free trials, and then we're going to evaluate as we go. So because we are still at testing phase, we're very much going to be led by the market, which is, I know, a very dangerous strategy. We're going to be led by the market in response of what can we do, because also our plan is we want to be able to respond to teachers in terms of what we're doing as well. So part of the trial is, you are able to use our products, but we would also like feedback of how we could make this better. And so when we're saying what we get in return for that, it means we're able to improve. And fundamentally, I think at this stage, that's what we need to be able to do. And then later is when we will start then assessing the cost more really. So we have an idea, but we're going to first see how valuable teachers think this is. So this is very much teacher-led. And my view is that's how it should be, because this is an educational setting that we're promoting these products in, and therefore it should be used by educators, and also they should be able to have a say in it.
What if I told you that you could transform your Monday morning lessons from not again to let's begin in under 60 seconds? Well, with Lumio quick launch templates, you can. All you need to do, go to lum.io, teacher login, Google, email, and you're in. Then click new, and you've got an array of different templates you can access, like shout it out or fill in the blanks, and just hit start. And then, very simply, Lumio generates a code for your students to access it, no login required, and you can thank me later. Yeah, I think that's a great thing. And one of the things we talk about sort of within my group is the for educators by educators. And we allude to that a little bit, don't we, when we talk about people pitching to us about use my product, use this product. It's like, and you know if they've been in a classroom, you know if they're a teacher or not, you know if they're doing it for teachers, or whether it's, as the saying goes, the snake oil salesman that, you know, very quickly jumped onto the wrappers of AI and will just push anything out there to make a quick buck. So that side of it, completely applaud that one, because I think it's great and the right value to approach it with as well. So looking ahead, obviously with this in terms of future vision and practical insights that we've got there, if you were to bet your mortgage on one AI technology or trend that you think is going to have a huge impact on an education, let's say, I want to go 5 years, seems like actually like it's probably even too long now. So let's just say in the future, we won't give it a time span. What do you think is going to be and why?
I think it is going to be essentially assessments. I think it will be a way to assess, so maybe rubric generators or actual real-time assessments, because I think ultimately when it comes to, we looked at COVID and we had the teacher assessments and the inconsistency and everything else, and I don't think it's the right thing that it should be focused, that should be the focus in the next 5 years, but I do have a feeling that that's where it can go, because I think that's the most easily regulated in terms of consistency. And so I think when it comes to what I think should be the educational landscape and how we're going to use AI, that's not where I think it should go. But I think in terms, it is the easiest to regulate. And because of that, I think that's why it would be the most easily adopted within the next 5 years. Because I know you said that 5 years might be too long, but actually, I think it will take much longer to implement, because of the existing infrastructure we have, especially in the UK, and the traditional curriculums that we have. I think it will take a lot longer than 5 years to actually implement. And also, I don't see our exam boards making any changes, and I'm not sure whether that will happen within 5 years. And I think English curriculum is very much based on exam boards. So until that's essentially amended, I'm not sure how much movement there really will be in the classroom.
Do you think that's going to have an impact on the job market then? Because we wonder, don't we, if we as educators, do we develop skill sets and students to go out and be functioning members of a society? In reality, what we mean is, well, we train them to go and get jobs rather than actually being a member of society who's going to do certain things. Because in some ways, we, or the companies and corporations tell us that they need these degrees and these examination results and these subjects to be able to go off and get jobs. But when you speak to people within those fields and within the universities, they're like, well, no, we kind of don't want that. And it seems there's a real miscommunication then. It's like, with everything we've discussed just then about the length of time it's going to take, do you think that there's going to be then a skills gap when it comes to job market, especially now, not just thinking within the UK, but if you think about America where there are no examinations, you think about maybe other areas, let's say Korea, who have, I think, just launched, didn't they? They've just in the last week or two put forward their own AI mandate initiative as well, similar to what the EU had done. You've got China, who have recently just come out, haven't they, again, with their own brand of AI. Are we going to see a divide in that respect? And if so, well, what do we need to be focusing on to try and diminish that?
I think there will be a divide, and I think even not on a smaller scale, I think there'll be a divide in our own society, because I think there will be a difference between those students and pupils who are able to explore in their own time with their own devices, with their infrastructure at home, and those, for example, who don't necessarily have devices at home as well. I think that's a big difference. So I think there's going to be a skills gap when it comes to, there will be certain nations that will forge ahead, and they will then be more digitally competent than others. But also within our own nation, I think there is going to be issues in regards to the abilities. I know that there are some schools, for example, who in their AI policies have said that pupils are able to use whatever they like in terms of AI unless explicitly told by a staff member that they can't use it. And then there's other AI policies where they say you cannot use AI at all unless your staff member tells you so. Now, just that disparity in itself is going to create a huge divide in terms of AI competency. And also, I think it's when it comes to universities as well and research, there's so many different applications that are coming out now which can aid pupils with research, but also that can essentially provide a crutch when it comes to research. I read an article not so long ago where there was a citation that was completely fictitious, made up by AI, but it had been cited 80 times. And that in itself is absolutely phenomenal. And that's what pupils need to be aware of. And I think it's not just a case of creating this divide, it's we need to teach pupils that actually AI has been designed to do a certain function. It has not been designed to think or to be correct in the way that we understand it. It is a predictability model. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And because of that, they expect it to create outputs that align with values that AI fundamentally does not yet have.
So do we think, from what you've just said there, is it worthwhile 1,000 schools doing different things, or would it be better that those 1,000 schools did just one thing when it comes to AI?
I think there needs to be overarching objectives. I think schools need to have autonomy over what they're doing because of the different nature of their pupils. But I do think there needs to be certain consistencies across different schools where it is a case of this is what we agree as a consensus are our non-negotiables, and then within that is then freedom to work around it, or potentially pilots in different schools as well where they can do it small scale to explore, so it's more research led as opposed to let's just put in policies and see what happens. But I think fundamentally schools still need to have some degree of control over their school, because their pupils, again, are going to be so different to the school down the road, the school across the country. And I think that is important to keep that autonomy where possible as well.
Thinking of, let's say, non-negotiable skills, then what would be some skills that you think would be non-negotiable that all students should learn?
I think ethics in terms of AI, I think is inherently the most important thing. When it comes to our courses, for example, I mean, our courses are just for teachers, but you can't do any of the courses until you've done the ethics one, which, might irritate some people, but fundamentally, I think that's the most important thing, because pupils and teachers need to understand what data they're able to put in, what it could generate, but also a case of what's the consequences of what it's generating. And I think that's very important. As we also need to make sure that we're using it properly, because ultimately, if we're using something to, create an essay, for example, which I fundamentally disagree with, but if you've got a pupil that puts it in and says, right, create me an essay on this, they need to be aware of the fact that that's actually not aiding them in their learning journey. If they put in, if they say, can you write me 3 essays with different perspectives, and then come up with a judgment on those 3 essays as to which one they agree with most, based on what they know, that's a far better use of it. And so they need to understand why it's being used, but also the ethics around it. They need to understand that it is inherently biased because it's also made up of data sets which are incomplete. I can't remember the statistics, but the vast majority of data it's being trained on is also from Western countries. And so because of that, we need to be aware that what it's outputting actually outputs a specific values that are not necessarily global or representative of our global community, but are very much based on more select groups. And that, I think, needs to be understood by pupils as well when they're using it.
And just to dive into one of the things you mentioned there, because I think this is also a real sticking point for educators, is what do we actually mean when we say the word ethics, especially when it comes to AI? Because my first introduction to ethics was within philosophy. And I think teachers and probably people listening and watching and generally who utilize AI, they hear a lot about AI ethics and ethics in AI, but kind of struggle then to understand what we truly mean by that and what that means for them and what they should be doing. If you were to just give us a simple definition or a synopsis of it, what is AI ethics to you?
To me, AI ethics is broken down into two parts, part of which is data and security and privacy. So that's one element of it in terms of, you shouldn't be using personal data. You shouldn't be inputting someone else's intellectual property without consent as well, I think is quite important. And also just making sure that whatever you're including is non-identifiable. Now, the other element of it is looking at the outputs. Now, ethics in that is the information or the content generated, is that ethical in terms of does it include bias? Does it represent certain groups? Is it putting across a perception which is from a certain view that might not necessarily be appropriate? And then as well as that, ethics in terms of how much responsibility we give AI. As an example, as teachers, or as you would say, as people, we have a duty to have care over each other as teachers when it comes to pupils. If they are exhibiting any behaviours that we think might be concerning, we have a duty to report. Now, if a pupil enters something concerning into AI, there is no responsibility to report. And that in itself is a fundamental question of how we should use AI ethically, because it doesn't have a duty of care. And so we need to have real consideration over how much we're allowing our young people to use it and giving training over that as well.
Thank you for going through that for me. Because we talk about it in science, about morals and ethics. And again, most people's, and from our generation's introduction to it is very generally philosophical about human behavior, about the rights and wrong choices. And so it's one of those things where it's almost becoming like a common phrase, and not to diminish it and its value in, but I don't want it to become just a buzzword that we see anyone who talks about AI. Hey, if you want to sound like you know what you're talking about when you talk about AI, just use the word AI ethics, and people are like, oh wow. It's like, no. There's got to be content to the concept, so that when we're going into classrooms and we're talking to educators and companies and parents and schools, like when we talk about these things, it's like, well, actually, it's good to educate teachers and students on ethics, full stop. Because it's just about analytical thinking, about the value and understanding where information comes from. Is it true? Is it false? How do we behave in these situations and scenarios? And apply it into a technical point with AI. It's then a step further into, well, the bias of it and the information input and output and legitimate and authenticity of said information. I think it's truly, truly important. And educators should, well, a lot of people, parents, students, teachers, need to understand this, because it forms the very foundation of why am I using this AI tool or platform? How am I going to use it? And when do I use it? And I think if we can answer those three questions, firstly as educators, and then to teach students, and then to help parents, it's going to go a long way in diminishing those gaps that we talk about, and also upskilling the students into a way that we want them to be, where they're not leaning on AI as such a crutch and getting it to do everything for them. And the same for teachers. Like if I'm a new teacher, 22, coming out straight into education, having just done, a PGCE or a GTP or a Teach First, whatever it may be, it's like, what's the value of what I've just learned? Pedagogical approaches, behavior management, what is the value of knowledge when I could just hey, I can go into AI, I can go into any of these platforms, and it could basically just find for me and regurgitate to me what I've just been had to read in a book. And that, for me, this idea of experience and expertise comes into it a little bit. And I find it fascinating. I know I'm going off a little bit, but I find it fascinating in terms of what we can be using it to learn and what we should be using it to learn, and how it affects our education sphere as a whole with everyone that's within that. That's me ranting, going off on one a little bit about it there.
But I think also we're thinking about, we're thinking about pupils, we think about teachers, but also I think we need to think about the parents as well. There are so many parents who have absolutely no idea how their children are using AI in school or out of school, and also how their children are being taught at school when we're thinking about AI, or their teacher usage. I think institutions need to be transparent about their teachers' usage of AI, the institution usage of AI, and also creating an environment where the pupils are able to say, yes, I used it, this is how, and we could say, well done, that's very resourceful, or, oh, okay, perhaps if you used it this way, it would be better, because actually that's not particularly helpful to your learning. But I think parents seem to be missing quite a lot from this debate as well, in this discussion. I think it's a case of, it's very much how do teachers use it, how do students use it, but how do parents know what's going on?
Very much so. And I think sometimes we have the wrong, or we misinterpret what people are actually using it for. And I don't know if you find this, when we talked earlier about people telling us what it can do, and then we hear people going, oh, students are using it. It's not going away. Students are, and I'm thinking to myself, I come across a lot of students day in, day out, and they might be using it. And I use the word might, but they're not using it very well. And actually, a lot of them aren't using it, don't want to use it necessarily, or don't feel confident, competent to use it. And so then you get this, again, another rhetoric, or at least a dichotomy of viewpoints, where you've got a media side and people pushing their own agendas to go, students are using it. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Have you actually listened to a teaching profession? People who are in the classroom and going, well, not all of them are using it. You might get pockets of, but it's the same way you get pockets of educators who are using it, because not all of them are. And that's a global issue. And as we said, you've got some countries, Finland, Korea, maybe into areas like where I am in the UAE, who are, and then you've got other countries who aren't, who have banned it, who don't want to use it. And so it's an interesting one about where can we, and I suppose it stems back to ethics. How do we know what we're being told is right? How do we know what we're being told is true, whether it's genuine information or not? And it's a huge, as someone said to me, it's a wicked problem to overcome, and it's going to take a period of time and years to come to make sense of it, to actually do something useful with it, I think.
Yeah, I think also in terms of another reason that I found why pupils tend not to use it is because they don't know what constitutes cheating when it comes to AI. It's very difficult to distinguish where that line is and because the line also moves dependent on which subject you're doing as well. In some subjects you might be able to use it for certain areas, and some you might not. And I think pupils are very concerned, especially when we use the term plagiarism. Pupils are concerned about how they're able to use it, and at what point it's a hard no, because ultimately it's quite a difficult question. Is it plagiarism to use something to create ideas? Is it? I personally don't know, but also, is it plagiarism when it comes to final output? When we use things such as AI Turnitin, for example, the plagiarism detector. And it would be interesting to know, at what point is that just using sentence structure? Because if that can't tell whether a pupil has put in their essay plan and said, give me the idea, and then I'll write it myself, that wouldn't be picked up. But if they'd come up with all the ideas and put in afterwards and said, reword all of my ideas, that would come up. Now, where's the line?
And it boils back down to how we assess. Because for your subject, the ability to construct an essay is a very important skill. For me as a scientist, it's like there are components of it, but it's not a priority skill. Analysis and evaluation of data potentially is. And actually AI's ability to do that is fantastic. But again, then it's like, well, you've not thought for yourself But then it's that question of, well, what are we actually assessing? And now, do we have to keep all the drafts? So you show me your ideations and show me your summaries, show me where it's fed back to you and you've made improvements. And that's why people like the work we talk about, Leon Furs in Australia, who's got this AI assessment scale. It's very simplistic, but it's so effective just in terms of getting us to reframe and rethink about not just how we assess, but more importantly, what we're assessing. And it would be really useful, like we say, if you have a subject-specific framework for, well, what are your priority skills that, are non-negotiable, things you need to be able to do, but then what are the skills or things that could be embedded and integrated with AI to help develop that? So like a Waggle, for example, those types of things where you can use AI to show me what a good one looks like, but then you get a completely different question to some extent, but you still have to write the essay. It's like, oh, well, if I take those key points that it showed me, I'm using it to develop my own learning and understanding. But like we say, that comes from teachers understanding how they can use it. That comes from providing teachers with options of how they can apply it and the training that goes with that. And at the moment, like we say, those things about what is plagiarism, what is cheating, what is an effective test assessment or piece of activity or work that I'm setting that can utilize it, rather than hey, just go and answer me these questions. And you'll be like, well, I don't want to waste my time on this. I'll just put it to ChatGPT, let it output that, because it's obviously, it's no time to me. It's not of value to me. I was on TikTok earlier today. I think there's an American TV series about some teachers. And this English teacher gone around and gave all his class back, and they're like F's, D's, and they're like, what are these? What are these grades? I've never had these grades. It's like, goes into the principal's office and hands him over as an English teacher. And then one of the things it says, AI could not understand this command. And the teacher's like, even the principal's like, well, that's the way the future's going. It's fine. And it's like, it's that type of thing, isn't it? We find ourselves at this fork in the road about the how, and it's an opportunity, isn't it? It's an exciting opportunity, and for you who is developing this AI company and at the forefront of being able to help upskill teachers in it, I think it's quite an exciting opportunity to be able to really rethink what we do and how we do it, and therefore the curriculum that we deliver with it.
Yeah, I think also the important thing is that we don't consider education when we're thinking about the new tools that are being introduced, but actually look at the digital needs of the future as opposed to the digital applications that we could be using now. I think that's currently where there seems to be some sort of mixed message in education, which is, what tools can we use in the classroom? And actually, we need to rethink how we're teaching in line with learning and teaching, because the tools that we're using today, at the rate that it's going, we won't be using next year anyway. It will be something entirely different. And so we need to be thinking about, well, what do we need to do to prepare our pupils in a digital age, not what tools can we crowbar into our classroom.
Yeah, it's the FOMO side of it. It's like, I'll just throw this in, fear of missing out. And we see that a lot. But you're right. I very much like that in terms of digital skills and digital future proofing versus just using something for the sake of using it, which I think is a very, very good way to look at it. Right, moving this on, I'm going to give you a quick fire round, and we can see how we go with this. Anyway, so let's start this off. What is one thing you wish people understood about AI in education?
So I think it's about the fact that it's not cheating. I don't think AI is cheating unless you don't use it properly. I think when we think about what more people understand, if you use it as an answer generator, yes, of course it's cheating. But if you use it as something that gives you options, and if you use it as a cognitive aid, then you have the capacity to stretch and challenge yourself. It's all about how you use it. And I think so many people are using it in such a superficial way, and that's where we're having hurdles in terms of people saying, oh, it's going to dumb down society. If you don't use it properly, yes, it will. If you use it properly, it does give us an opportunity.
Amazing. If you could invite any historical figure to discuss AI, who would it be and why?
Socrates. I feel like he'd be a good chap to talk to. About 2,000 years ago, he was talking about how his fear of the new technology, and at that point it was writing. So Socrates believed that the process of writing something meant that you no longer had to retain it in your mind, so therefore you were dumbing down your experience. So I'd be very interested to see what his take would be on something such as AI, when to him the process of writing was something that would significantly impair your cognitive ability. So I'd be very intrigued to see what his view would be on AI.
Amazing. Okay. What is a failure or challenge in your journey that has taught you the most?
I think it's been very much this couple of years has been quite a challenge in general. I have been learning consistently, and I think a big part of that is being a active practitioner, as well as setting up a business, as well as doing a master's, and also having a toddler. Is it's a lot. It
Yeah.
is a lot. It is a challenge, and it means that it's taught me a lot, because it means I have to prioritize and I have to think about it sensibly. But also because AI is moving at such a rapid pace, just keeping up with it alone and doing nothing else is actually quite a challenge. And also because it's so new, there are so many different perspectives in terms of how to use it, and so much literature which is coming out, which is, some of it is supporting certain ideas, others are contradicting it, and there's just so much information at the moment that it's quite a challenge to sometimes see what is valuable through what is essentially just, I suppose, regurgitation of the same things that might not necessarily be quite as valuable.
What's the saying? Is it the wood through the trees? I
That's
can't
the
remember.
one.
Yeah, that's the one. Something like that. And lastly, with this one, what would be your dream project for AI Edify in the next 5 years?
I think dream project wise, I would like to extend our courses so that there's far more, not just on AI, but also on teaching and learning in general. What I would love to do is to essentially create a research hub for teachers, but also then to look at the student side as well. We're currently only looking at teachers simply because of the safeguarding issues around pupils. I don't think there's enough data and understanding to be able to pursue that ethically and responsibly yet, in my personal view. I think that there needs to be far more active research looked into in terms of how it impacts their learning, and also the safeguards that can be put around anything that they use. So I'm hoping with more research in the next 5 years, we'll be able to actually create something that benefits pupils as well, but ethically. I don't believe in forging ahead with something where it doesn't have ethical safeguards around it.
Thank you. Yeah. And hopefully we're going to see, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because obviously when we talk about safeguarding and the fencing off, it's often to do with then ages. And a lot of the platforms now, and I had this conversation previously, use your Google login, use your Microsoft login. And it's like, well, we're a Google school. My eldest is 11. She has a Google login. Like, I don't want to test this with her, but it would be interesting if I said, oh, we're going to set you up a ChatGPT account. You're only 11, so you're not 13. You're not 18, which is where you should be. I wonder if it would let you in. That for me is a big concern, because, yes, I can say, her screen time, her access to the internet is a concern itself. But then being able to then access this a step further, again, from when we spoke about ethics, it's a very, it's that, because you see in school, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds who are using it, you set them off on a task and they just automatically go to it now, instead of even going to Google, straight to ChatGPT. Well, what do you do in class? Do you stop them and then go, have your parents said it's okay for you to use this as a, third, or do you stop them and go, well, hang on a minute, guys, you're only year 7. You're not allowed to use this. Please turn it off. Like, what do you do with that? That for me is a bit of a quandary.
But it's also in terms of, me personally, I'm not sure I agree with the 13 for ChatGPT. I think that's very young. I think there needs to be. I know that there are some companies that are trying to create sandbox models where there's certain elements they can't break through. But the difficulty is then are we really teaching the pupils how to use it as well? It's kind of a double-edged sword there. Are we preparing them? at what age do we give them access? So what do we start, I suppose, teaching them first about ethics before they have access? Then we do practical application, because then one would argue before they go to university and become more independent in terms of their learning, at that point, should they not have already had, I suppose, some sort of interaction supervised? But then it's a case of at what age should that then be implemented? And also when it comes to, I know that they've got built-in restrictions, so you can't ask certain things, but there's so many things you can ask around it to still get the results you want. So just because it blocks off certain ideas, it just blocks off certain outputs. I mean, if you ask enough questions, you can still break the models. Yeah. And that's what's concerning. I definitely wouldn't challenge a 14-year-old to break something on chat. Of course they would. They're far more innovative than I think anyone gives them credit for.
So let's play devil's advocate for this for just one moment and go, well, isn't AI just a fancy form because it's just learned from the internet? Isn't it just a fancy form of the internet? Does that mean then that we need to limit students' use onto the internet? Just as a thought there.
Well, I would argue it depends on what you want them to be learning. I think that when it comes to fundamentals, I think that, when I start my lessons, for example, all of our pupils have access to individual devices. But when we first start concepts, they don't have access to that. We say put them down, simply because my view is until you know how to apply it and what we're looking for, it doesn't matter what you're looking up. There needs to be a base understanding. And surely that should be the same as well. When it comes to AI, I suppose it's fancy technology. But also, I would argue that it's better in terms of the sheer volume it can generate and the types of things it's able to generate. It does make it better. But I also think it's worse from the respect of it has essentially scraped the internet and it doesn't output necessarily what you want it to. It outputs what it's aligned to do, and that might not necessarily be what you want. If I'm asking, I don't know, give me 10 articles on this, I'm not sure all 10 will be valid. Maybe 7 at the moment would be valid and 3 would be made up. But what's concerning, I had a conversation with someone who was trying it out in terms of quotations. One of an English teacher that I know who was trying it out in terms of whether pupils could find quotes to support their arguments, and she found a fantastic quote. It was not real at all. It was completely fictitious. And so that's what's quite concerning as well, is at least with Google, you can look at things and pupils understand where there are areas where it's more reliable and the websites they should stay away from. With AI, they don't yet know that. No. And I think that's where the danger lies.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's going to be a question that rolls for a long time, isn't it, in terms of those things. But drawing this one to a close, if there's one key thing that you want listeners and viewers to be able to take away from our conversation today, what would it be?
I think it's a case of use AI not as an answer generator, but something that is a creative aid. Ask for options, not answers. And that's where it will really benefit, stretch, challenge, and be a helpful aid as opposed to a cognitive crutch.
Great stuff. And for those people out there who want to connect with you and learn more about AI Edify, where is the best place for them to find you?
So I would say either LinkedIn, which actually is my newest social platform. I wasn't actually on there until last year, and my gosh, there's a lot happening there. So Bianca Farthing on LinkedIn, or our website as well, which is aiedify.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on and speaking with me today and on the International Classroom podcast. I think it's just a fascinating viewpoint that you have when it comes to AI, about options as well, and then empowering educators to develop that cognitive component and the work that you're doing with and talking about it. And I look forward to seeing a lot more of your work on LinkedIn as well, because I've been appreciating and enjoying what you've done so far this last year now, I have to say. So yeah, very excited for 2025 for you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.